For joining today's webinar, Real Talk 2.0. We'll be reviewing the content of this remarkable workshop. I'd like to introduce our presenter today. John Stoker is the CEO and founder of DialogueWORKS, the leading provider of Real Talk, a best-selling solution for creating real conversations for results. As you'll note, John is also the author of the acclaimed book, Overcoming Fake Talk. Its solutions have helped thousands of organizations and countless individuals acquire the skills to talk with anyone, anytime, about anything. Take it away, John.
Thanks, Brett. Let's talk for a moment about today's agenda. There are three things specifically I want to do. I want to begin by just making an application to some organizational challenges, and then we'll review the content, and there's a lot, so I'll try and move quickly, and then I'll take a moment just to talk about a few rollout strategies that people can employ. So I guess the first question we should ask if people are not familiar is, what is fake talk? Now, when I ask that question in a workshop, they'll often say, well, it's probably people not telling it like it is, or it's lying. But in reality, all of these would be examples of fake talk. And I, to be honest, kind of fall prey to the second check, unintentionally being vague or unclear. It's like, how often have you said, hey, I need that by the end of the week, and then it starts to get to be about the end of the week, and you go, oh my gosh, I needed that Thursday at 1, and that is not what I said. And so when you go to the person, they say, well, I can't do that. You didn't tell me up front. So I think a lot of fake talk occurs unintentionally, but obviously the last three also occur where people will not speak up and share what they really think. They'll go along to be agreeable, or they'll focus more on what they think is politically correct, which may be not to say anything at all, or just basically withholding what they really think because they're afraid of consequences. So what is fake talk? Really, it's any conversation that does not achieve the desired result. And we've all done that. We've all held conversations to address a particular problem or a challenge or a solution, and we think it's handled, and then we don't find out till down the road that even though we held the conversation, it didn't really help solve the situation. That's fake talk. So what are some of the results of real talk? I'm going to spend a minute on this slide because I could have just as easily asked, what is a great training program? Well, a great training program is any program that helps a company or an organization address particular challenges that they're having. It's more than just administering the annual employee survey and it coming back saying that communication here is not very good, and let's take a training for communication without trying to address anything. This is just kind of a short list, and I can't name companies, but let me kind of go through a few of these and kind of illustrate what happened. There was one company, an aerospace company, that wanted us to help improve the productivity of their people by reducing the time it was taking to make a particular product. We were actually successful in doing that and reducing the time from 18 months to 11 months. Increased customer service. Actually, we had a client in the Midwest that was a bank that was in Nebraska, Iowa, and even Minnesota, and they identified that they had kind of two problems. One was they were getting feedback from their customers that they were grumpy. And people didn't feel like they could engage with them. So we used the Real Talk training to help people up their engagement and teach them how to ask questions that would engage their employees and their customers in a way that helped people feel like they were more customer oriented. And then they wanted to improve their accountability, so we did some measurement research and found that the industry standard for tellers across the nation was most tellers would see 15 clients, for example, in an hour. And the bank we were working in was basically seeing about 7 on an average. So big disparity there. On top of it, the bankers, now a banker is somebody that might open an account for you or do a loan application. The industry standard across the country was about 5 customers an hour, and we found out that our bankers were seeing 7 customers a day. So once we had those measurements, then it was very easy in terms of accountability to teach people how to hold the conversation around, here's where you're operating at, here's what our goal is, let's talk about that. So when we get a little further down the road, I'll give an example of that. Another client, the Department of Energy, has had some real challenges cleaning up some, I guess what you'd call radiation incidents, where some certain parts of the facility got contaminated, and we were brought in to teach real talk skills to help teams work more effectively together and improve collaboration in the way they got things done to increase efficiency. Another company was very much interested in respect and trust, and the reason that they were is their workforce, their managers, were very highly autocratic and dictatorial, very disrespectful. And what was happening there is that turnover was approximately 25% of the workforce per year, which was costing them millions of dollars by the time you added up the price of paying some people who were leaving and then hiring new people and retraining them and the like. And we started teaching the real talk skills there, and were able to reduce turnover by about 68% within the first year alone. Another company brought us in because their senior managers could not engage in conflict resolution very effectively. They kind of labeled themselves the nice organization, which means if they couldn't embrace and understand how to resolve conflict, then they couldn't solve problems. And so we rolled out the training for everybody in managerial positions to teach them skills around conflict resolution and solving problems. And finally, another organization on a nuclear generating station in the Midwest had us come in because they were having real safety issues and concerns. Actually, somebody got killed because of an accident, and so people weren't speaking up when they were seeing things that weren't safe, and so we taught them skills that would help them do that. So there's some of the applications. You want to engage in real talk, and you want to do it around things that will help your organization, your teams, and even you individually improve the results that you're getting. So here's the real talk model. Everybody talks about improving results. You can see it over there. But what they usually don't talk about is respect and relationship. And we really believe that you cannot achieve the results that you want unless you're also dealing with respect and relationship. For example, if the respect's not there, will that impact the relationship? Sure it will. And will it impact the quality of the results that you get? Absolutely. So that's why the arrows run in all the different directions. You can't deal with one without dealing with the other. So everybody wants results, but we also want to improve our respect and build the quality of our relationships. So we believe that every conversation that we have has a line in it. And the line represents the choice to go above the line or below the line. All right, so notice in this instance, when people choose to stay below the line, really what they're doing is probably engaging in some form of fight or flight. So the Real Talk course deals with teaching people how to lift conversations above the line, and there are 8 succinct modules for doing it. The first 4 modules is choose to be conscious. We call that the awareness principle, where people need to be more aware of kind of what's going on in conversation. Do to know is the knowledge principle, and I'll go into these in more depth in a minute. This is about knowing the skills and the process for holding any difficult conversation. Prepare or beware is the preparation principle. How do we prepare for a conversation? Whether you take some time to do that or do it on the fly. And reflections is about style, the style that people reflect to others. Inside that blue ring is the red ring, which basically characterizes the skills that we want people to learn. And they are recognize and suspend, express, ask, listen, and attend. I kind of like to think of the blue ring, if you will, as kind of the knowledge principles, things you ought to know to manage and hold a difficult conversation. And the maroon or red ring is kind of the action ring. These are the different skills that you should be engaged in. And of course, the process for holding any difficult conversation is initiate, discover, connect, and build. So that's the model for the course. Aside from the first module, which is entitled What Keeps You Up at Night, where people get a chance to identify something they want to work on throughout the course, then what we do is take people through the course teaching them these 8 succinct modules and the principles and the skills that go with them. So that being the case, let's begin with the first principle, which is the awareness principle. Awareness is about dynamics that are present in every conversation. Most people are not aware of what's going on in a conversation, unfortunately, until it's too late, until things start to blow up or go south. So we teach people what kind of dynamics they should be aware of in every conversation and help them to have deliberate attention as to what those dynamics are. Now, to do that, you have to choose to be conscious. And the reason that that's important is because if you can't see it, then you can't manage it. So what I did is I put a few skills in with each principle that'll help you. This skill is kind of analogous to what we were just talking about, the line representing the choice to go over the line or stay below the line. So conversations that are based on fight or flight are usually reactionary, cause a whole lot of defensiveness, and they're usually very disrespectful. And so what we want people to do is be able to recognize that and lift the conversation above or over the line. So there are some things that a person can do that are very deliberate. They can ask questions, they can listen, they can share their perspective respectfully, they can learn from one another, and they can change or adapt. And so the way that we lift a conversation, even though I didn't put a slide in it, is by asking questions. Questions get people out of the reactionary part of their brain, forces them to think, and answer a question which lifts the conversation above the line. What's the knowledge principle? Everybody says, oh, you know, I have a hard time holding these conversations. I just don't know how to hold them. That's the knowledge principle. And I want you all to know that you can learn and know how to improve your results by following the process and the skills that will teach you. The thing that's kind of interesting about this principle is we don't really know what we know until we do something. In fact, when I was a youngster, the way I paid for my college was to go and work in the Grand Canyon as a whitewater guide. Those of you who know me know that. So what's interesting is you know, I didn't really get paid anything until I could demonstrate competency on my own boat. And I'll remember when I first ran Crystal Rapid, man, I had pictures of it. I had spotted where all the rocks were, what I needed to do at a certain point in time, and then I get in the rapid, and what happens? I can't see the rocks, I can't see the waves, I'm not even seeing the current, and I blow it. And I run over a rock and break the lower unit off the motor, and thank heaven I didn't tear the boat. But it's when we actually do something that we figure out what we know. So what's really interesting is when you're not really getting the results that you want, you know two things, right? You either know that what you're doing isn't working, or what you're doing, you don't know what you're doing. And so what we want to do is get real clear on that. So let me show you the model for the skills. We call this the real skills model. And obviously real is an acronym for recognize and suspend, express, ask, listen, and attend. Well, recognize and suspending has to do with your thinking. What you're thinking, because what you're thinking drives everything else. Expression is nothing more than sharing your ideas and opinions and experience and feeling. We want to learn to express our point of view in such a way that it doesn't alienate everybody. Asking is nothing more than, as you see there, it's asking questions, trying to understand. And listening and attending, listening is kind of do it with what we do with our ears, and attending is what we do with the rest of us, with our eyes, with our heart, with our body, with our intuition. So those are the real conversation skills, and here's the process for using them. So people often ask, well, how'd you come up with these? Well, notice right here, if I combine recognizing and suspending, which is, if I made it simple, is being open and expressing, I create a field of what we call initiation. In initiation or beginning, we do three things. We garner the attention of our listener, then we share facts or data and our thinking, interpretation. In discovery, if I'm open and I ask questions, I create a field of discovery. So what do? We ask questions to confirm our thinking or to learn. In connection, after we've asked a lot of questions, we do three things if we need to. We summarize what's important to the other person, which would be the values part. And if it's the kind of conversation that's about and poor performance, and we want to establish expectations and consequences, then we would share that in connection. Finally, in building, what we want to do is create a plan and gain commitment to that plan. Now, the thing that's fabulous about the model is you'll always know how to start one of these conversations that we often struggle with. You'll always know where you are in the course of that conversation, and you'll always know when you're done. In fact, the most important part of the conversation is the build, because that's where you're establishing a plan for what it is you're going to do differently. And then you gain commitment to that plan. So those are both taught in the knowledge principle. Let's talk about the preparation principle. Preparation is gigantic, and the reason that it is because if we're prepared, like they say, shall not fear, gives us confidence during this conversation, so we don't have to shoot from the hip. And it also helps us to focus on what our objectives are and what it is that we want to accomplish. Now, I like this slide because it says, why is it that we prepare? When I wrote my book, we did some research and survey research, and we asked 10,000 leaders how often they actually prepared for holding a potentially difficult conversation. And we were shocked when we got the results back that said that less than 5% of that 10,000 individuals said they rarely ever prepared. And you wonder why we don't do very well when we hold potential difficult conversations. So here's the part for the slide. There are three parts of our brain: the unconscious, subconscious, and the conscious. Your unconscious is reactive and protective. In fact, in training, I'll often pull somebody out of the audience, and I'll just take a swipe at their eyes, and they'll blink and pull themselves backward. That's the reactive protective function of the brain. There's no conscious thought that goes into, oh, I better close my eyes because John is going to hit me in the eyes. It's not that at all. The subconscious, however, which is above the unconscious, is also protective, but it's illogical. Now, we've all had this kind of an experience. In fact, in my first job in corporate America, my first boss was a gentleman who was over 60 with white hair. And he was kind of Attila the Hun. And after working for him in this particular organization for 3 or 4 years, I kind of had enough, and so I decided to find another job. So the first day of my new job, I got hired. I walked in for the onboarding training, and there was a gentleman with white hair over 60. And my brain starts going wild. And what's the kind of stuff it's saying? Oh, man, you blew that. Look out. Here we go again. You were dumb. Man, you should have stayed where you were. At least you knew what you were dealing with. Here you go. And so notice, it's trying to protect me. What did I start to feel? Anxious and even maybe a little fearful. But it was illogical. I had no information or experience, with that person. So I used my conscious brain, which is logical, rational, to talk me out of that and just say, wait, do I know this guy? No, I don't. Notice I'm using questions on myself. Do I have any data that he's going to be Attila the Hun? No, I don't. Maybe he's not even your manager. Maybe he's just doing the onboarding training. Do you know that for sure? No, I really don't. So notice as I asked myself those logical, rational questions, the feeling subsided, and then I got to a place where I could say, well, introduce myself, introduce himself, and then I asked him, and he was just doing the training for the day. He wasn't my manager. So why is that important to conversation? Because if people don't prepare, if you know that 2/3 of your brain is reactive, protective, and illogical, it helps you understand why people who are untrained and not prepared go to fight or flight. It's just 2/3 of the brain is, if you want, hardwired negative. So preparing, even just a little bit, creates a new reality or increases the likelihood that you're going to get different results. So how do we do that? Here's what we do. First step, you want to clarify your own assumptions. So a question we have people ask themselves during our training is, so, what are you feeling, thinking, believing about this person in the situation? And we ask them to answer that question. So let's say I answered it. I'm feeling angry. And what am I thinking? Gosh, I'm thinking that the reason I didn't get what I wanted is because the person didn't listened to me when I gave directions. Now notice, if I surface that thinking, I'm forced to ask myself, wait a minute, do we absolutely know why they didn't follow my directions? Do I really know they weren't listening? And I have to admit to myself that I don't. So what that kind of does is gives me a little bit of a chill pill on my own thinking and the feelings that I may be generating because of that thinking. We also ask people to ask the question, even though they're guessing, what are they thinking and believing and feeling about me in this situation? And I know it's a guess, but what it does is it helps a person to prepare. Because if I thought, well, my assistant, she's angry and she thinks that I'm going to berate her or give her a hard time, if she comes to me and we start this conversation and I can see she is angry, then I've already anticipated that that would happen and I'm not derailed by it. So if I answer my own question there, why is it important to clarify your assumptions? One, it helps you to look at your own thinking and the thinking that's driving your feelings. And maybe give yourself a little bit of a chill pill. And if I answer it from the other person's perspective, it kind of gives me a chill pill that if I see those feelings and those thoughts, then I won't be derailed by them because I've anticipated that they've happened. The second thing we want to do in preparing for a conversation is to identify our intent. And that's easy. All I got to do is ask myself, what do I want? What's my purpose? Now, I'll be honest, when we create stuff, we all practice them in our company for at least 6 months before we introduce them in any kind of a training. And the first time I was using this skill on myself, my son had gotten a D in Chinese. And when I answered that question, what do I want, I literally wrote on a piece of paper, I want to guilt you so badly that you will be motivated to take care of your own studies so I will have to quit nagging you. And when I thought about that, I thought, this conversation is doomed. And I had to spend quite a bit of time identifying what a better intent would be. And it came out something like, I want him to come to a self-realization that he's responsible for his grades and he's responsible for his homework so that I don't have to be on him anymore. He's just going to learn it and manage it on his own. Now, when I wrote that, I thought, my gosh, how am I going to do that? And it took quite a bit of time in thinking through what I would say and what questions I would ask and how I would summarize and where I'd move to basically coming up with a plan. But the point is, in short, if you don't know what you want, it really doesn't matter what you get. So what this does is it forces you to identify specifically what your purpose is for holding a specific conversation. The third step we use in preparation is using what we call an attention check. Most of the time, the companies we've worked with, when we start, they'll say, man, I really have a hard time starting one of these tough conversations. And I might say, so what did you do? Well, I started off by saying, man, you blew that presentation yesterday. Can we talk about it? So notice what that does. It creates instantaneous defensiveness. So we came up with this skill, which we call an attention check, for which the purpose is just to get the attention of your listener. So how do we do it? We share our intention for the conversation, so now you can see why it's important to get clear about your intention. And then we ask them for permission to engage. So if I just changed up the example a little bit, notice I could say, gosh, I'd like to talk about the presentation you gave yesterday. Can we talk about it? And notice in the way I stated it and the tone I used, there's nothing derogatory about that. They might say, sure, what about it? So notice at the bottom there it says your attention check should be neutral. I just gave a neutral example. Or positive. So a positive example would be, hey, I'd like to talk about how you might make some really positive, even greater impact in your presentations than you did yesterday. Would you be interested in visiting about that? So notice I'm taking a positive approach to start the conversation. So the third step in preparation is helping people to create an attention check. The fourth step is helping folks to distinguish between data and interpretation. This little slide is there to help you understand what we call the way we think, which we call the process of perception. So let me explain it, and then we'll adapt it to communication. So notice the person in the dotted box there on the right is looking through this lens that's titled mental models. That's what we use in our field to describe kind of, I guess you'd just make it simple and call perception. If you were a Covey fan, he would refer to that as your paradigm. If you were a Hiram Smith fan, who was the founder of the Franklin Daytimer Company, he'd refer to it as your belief window. The actual term in social psychology is a schema. So this person, making observations through the 5 senses, views this event, or what we've labeled as the data pool, through the lens of their mental models, and then engages in the process of selection. So as they look at the event, what they see are leaves. But any of you looking at the same event might say, well, I see the fruit, or I see the kind of tree, or I see the shape, or I see the color, or I see the little lamb's head you drew in the top of the slide, or, oh, there's a grumpy guy. Can you see the grumpy guy? Or an upside down horse's head. Now, the reason we put those in there for fun was to help people to recognize that we don't all see the same thing in the same way. And then what we do is take the selected pieces of information or data, filter them through our mental models, and either add stuff we like or subtract stuff we don't, and then like pieces of a puzzle, we put them together and make some interpretation about what they all mean. So you'll notice there are some black spots which are intended to portray gaps or blanks in your thinking. So let me illustrate. When I wrote my book, McGraw-Hill said, hey, we'd like you to record a little vignette called Gentle Reminders that you'll put up on your website that people can view that are additional stories or skills that they can access. And we'd like you to put the link at the end of every chapter. So you can find those on our website. They're there. But on a day when we were recording them, I was going down the hall. My spouse was in the office that day helping us record, and she came out of a side office holding the new camera, big lens under one arm, and a roll of paper towels under another. And I go, oh, please, please just tell me you didn't wipe the lens with the paper towel. And she goes, you want to try that again, Buster? So notice, all I saw was the camera under one arm and a roll of paper towels under another. And I interpreted that to mean she had wiped the lens with the paper towels. No data, just I filled in the gaps. There's a blank there. And obviously, I was feeling a little frustrated in the moment. Now, obviously, she observed that in the way I spoke to her, and she interpreted, you know, John's a jerk today. And she got a little emotional back and said, what, you want to try that again? So notice when my action really was a reaction where I said, please don't tell me you did that. And of course, that went into the data pool, and then she responded in the way she did and kind of fired back. This whole process occurs in 1/400th of a second. What's important is that the data leads us to select and interpret. This is our thinking. And our thinking in turn drives our emotion. And our emotion, particularly if that emotion is negative or hot, it drives or fuels a reaction which creates results that goes back into the data pool. So what is this to do with communication? This has everything to do with basically understanding that if we think in terms of data and interpretation, then why don't we communicate in that way? So the first thing we want to do as we start a conversation is basically want to focus attention. So I might say, I'd like to talk about your presentation yesterday. Can we talk? Sure. And then here are the facts, right? I noticed yesterday during the presentation that there wasn't a handout and there were a lot of slides. In fact, I think I counted there were 55 slides within a half hour. So that's facts, right? And I noticed that people were scrambling to take notes, and they were even going, oh. In fact, I think 2 people asked you if you could back up a slide so they could capture what you're doing. I'm thinking that perhaps you weren't so cognizant of what the audience might need. I'm going to go to discovery. So what do you think about what I just said? So notice in the initiate part of conversation, we want to focus their attention, share data and interpretation, which means that you have to be able to make the distinction between data and interpretation. So let me talk quickly about the perception principle, and then we'll link it back to exactly what we just talked about. Perception influences everything. It basically influences how we interpret our own life experiences, how we deal with certain people because of the way we think of them, how we respond in certain situations based on our history, which basically means it impacts how we create results. So to be effective as a communicator, you have to be able to challenge your own thinking. To do that, what we want to do is be able to make the distinction between data and interpretation. So what are data? Data for us is verifiable facts or information. So if I could see you all and you were all on my screen, maybe one of you is wearing a sweater and I could say, oh, I notice Amanda, who I haven't seen forever, is wearing a sweater today. I wonder if it's cold in Florida. Right? If you could all see her, you would verify, yep, there's Amanda and she's wearing a gray sweater. So verifiable facts would include the facts of a situation, the facts of impending consequences. Like, you know, I didn't get the report by 4 o'clock, and so I couldn't give it to the VP for him to review it before his 5 o'clock meeting with the CEO. That's facts of impending consequences. And there's facts of expectation and occurrence, which is what, here's what I expected or we agreed to, here's what actually occurred. Facts can also include a recitation of feelings, I notice you're crying, or words, I heard you say in the meeting, oh great, right, what did that mean? Or actions, I noticed that you didn't say anything in our meeting for 2 hours. Most of the time we don't see all the facts, we only see the facts that support our thinking. So that's data. So what's interpretation? I've often asked people, so what do you think that means? And people will say, oh, it means touchdown. And then I'll push back a little bit and say, well, couldn't that also mean field goal? Or couldn't it mean extra point? And then somebody will usually chime in and say, it could mean he's just stretching. Okay, so what's interpretation? Interpretation is the meaning we assign the facts. So what do I mean by that? So if I could see, and I can't, but if I could see, you know, Amanda wearing a sweater, I might say, oh, I bet she wore it because she was cold today. That's the meaning I would assign to the wearing of the sweater. So for us, interpretation is synonymous with assumption, opinion, judgment, inference, conclusion, assessment, guess, and usually our thinking is grounded in the facts. But guess what? If we don't have any facts, we make up the assumption. And the challenge becomes is that people often see our assumptions as facts. We think because we thought it that it's a fact when it's not. So here's the challenge. We have to learn as a skill to separate data from interpretation. Our data is usually surrounded by our interpretation. Or if you made it easy, the things we see and hear give rise to what we think. Right? So our interpretation, I've found, often becomes so big that it obscures the data. So I might say, you know what, Jill, she doesn't like me. Right? So that's my interpretation. All the data is obscured. In my mind, I'm focused on the fact she doesn't like me. So the skill becomes, can we separate the data from the interpretation? In other words, what is the data? And does the interpretation logically flow from that data? When people start understanding what data is and go looking for it, oftentimes there is no data, which means their interpretation is just nothing more than their interpretation. So how does this apply? It has to do with how we express our views. Even though we're talking expression, I'm also talking about what happens in initiation. So first off, what's expression? Expression deals with how we share our ideas, opinions, thoughts, and it's an expression, it's an extension, excuse me, of our intention. So the words you use, the tone you use, the inflection, the emotional energy you bring, the tempo that you bring, pauses, all reflect what's going on in your head. So the challenge becomes is how do I express myself in such a way that it creates engagement and contribution rather than defensiveness in the other person. So what we do in the course is we teach people the language of data and interpretation. So notice the language of data. I noticed, I observed, I heard, I feel. As opposed to interpretation, I'm wondering, I'm guessing, I'm thinking, I'm assuming. So notice all that language kind of indicates thinking. So if I went to the example of the bank where we measured and we found out that the industry standards for tellers and bankers was much higher than we were actually performing, and I wanted to hold somebody accountable, I might start with, hey, I'd like to talk about last week's numbers for a moment. Can we talk? Notice my positive tone. And they'll go, sure, what's up? Well, I noticed in reviewing the reports that came out yesterday that you got up to about 8 clients an hour as a teller. And yet our goal has been in this branch at least 12. I'm wondering if there's something that's kind of getting in the way of you meeting that goal. Tell me what you're thinking. What's going on? So no, I initiated using an attention check, data, and then interpretation. I moved immediately to discovery. So what's important for us to understand, particularly in the way we express ourselves, is that we want to do so in such a way that it doesn't create defensiveness. It creates engagement where people will listen, hear, and you're holding the conversation. So another skill would be we teach people, as you just saw in the previous slide, to use I statements rather than you statements. I statements soften the you. If you start a conversation or the sentence with you, we often have a tendency to inflect that you in a way that comes across as accusation. We also want people to learn to avoid is statements and absolutes. So, for example, that is a dumb idea is really an opinion, but it sounds like it's a fact because of the is, or you are wrong. Absolutes would be words like never and always. You know, and a person says, you know, I'm not always late. I was on time yesterday. And those seem to kind of get people going. So what we do is we teach people to use I statements, avoid is statements and absolutes, or any words that are disrespectful. And then on top of that, we add another skill to that, which we call balancing expression with asking contributions. So if you look at my example, excuse me, I'm thinking this is the way to go. What do you think? Or I believe this is correct. What's your view? I believe we are right, but you may see it differently, do you? So do you see what we're doing? We're creating engagement after making that kind of a statement. Now, in any of the companies that want to improve collaboration or problem solving, this becomes a critical skill. Because if you say, hey, you know, given what I think I know, and obviously I would bolster that with data, data, that leads me to think, I'm thinking this. What do you think? Do you disagree? Do you see it differently? Tell me what facts you have that kind of supports your view. Notice what we're doing now. We're engaging in real talk or dialogue, where we're trying to get everybody's information and understanding out on the table so we can learn from one another. So anytime you have an opportunity to do that, it becomes huge, particularly in conflict resolution, after we get rid of the emotion. This is a skill that you would use. And the reason we do it is to increase contribution by ending in questions, and then using questions to continue that engagement and like. So questions kind of brings us to the discovery principle. You know, asking questions, I often say to people, is the easiest way to create respect. Why? Because it says, I care enough to ask and to listen to your perspective and what it is that you want. Now, at that company where we were trying to change their culture, we taught this to folks, and then we went away. We taught all the managers and the C-suite leaders, then we taught all the hourly folks in a shorter version of the course. Then we went away for 6 months, and then we came back. And on the first day, I walked around out on the floor, and asked people, for feedback about how things were going. And here's what I heard. Well, this morning my manager asked me what I thought, and as I was telling him, he kind of looked like he was listening, but then when I finished, he said, "Next time I'll ask an expert," and walked off. And then another person said to me, my manager asked me what I thought, and as I was telling her, she walked off and left me talking to myself. So I thought, oh my gosh. So we did some focus groups and found out we needed to do some retraining, and so we did. Because obviously they understood, or we taught them, that the easiest way to create respect. But they didn't get it. They didn't connect the dots. So the way they behaved did more to undermine their own credibility. So now we often say to people, you can create respect, but it implies you got to listen. And if you don't want to know, then don't ask. But authentically trying to understand another person becomes key to sharing ideas and perspectives and getting others to share theirs. When we ask questions, we really initiate thinking, which changes minds and hearts. I really believe we do far too much telling. So if I said, well, you blew that, notice that's a tell. But if I said, help me understand what you are trying to achieve in the way you delivered your presentation. Notice now they're not defending themselves. They're thinking. And they're thinking like, what was I trying to achieve? And there's no defensiveness. They're thinking, and then they'll answer. And the chance of me getting a candid, authentic answer is even more likely because I showed an interest in what the thinking was behind what it is that they did. So in the course, we teach 5 particular types of questions, or what we call discovery types of questions. And here they are: a reflect, a request, a guess, a question, and a summarize. Reflecting is doing nothing more than acknowledge a person's emotion, words, or actions. So I can see you're upset. Now, the fact that that's not really a question, but what it does when a person is highly emotional, it's an acknowledgement or affirmation of their feelings, which has the effect of reducing them. Then I might make a request. Tell me about your thinking here. Or if they're really skittish and don't seem like they want to answer, then we teach people to use a guess. I'm guessing I might have done something in the meeting yesterday to offend you. So notice all they have to do with that is answer yes or no. It makes it very easy. And question is where I want to get information. What led you to that conclusion, or what led you to that behavior? And then lastly, we put summarize because it goes to clarifying. At any point in time in a conversation where you want to make sure that you've understood, you can clarify what you thought people have said. So here's a little chart that teaches people what question skill to use when. We know that when emotion is high and security is low, you want to reflect. Obviously, if there is no emotion, you're free to just jump right to questions. But if emotion is high, then I might want to say, I can see you're upset. Tell me what's going on. Or I can see you're upset and ask a guess. Have I done something to offend you? Notice all they got to do is say yes or no. Or I can see you're upset. What's up? And at any point in time, I can summarize. But the whole notion is to reflect, to reduce the emotion, and increase the security. So as the emotion subsides and the security goes up, right, you can ask these questions. So the only thing you really need to remember is if there's hot or negative emotion, you want to reflect first, then follow it with any kind of a questioning technique. Well, let's talk about the last principle, which is connection. We connect with people as we listen and attend to them. And I believe I already said this, but we listen with our ears, right? And we attend with the rest of us, our eyes, our hearts, and our whole person. We're basically present with a person. So in this section, we've included some skills that you could basically say deal with emotional intelligence. Everybody wants to talk about, well, people get emotional. How do you diffuse that emotion? And so we created this model that we call EASE. And EASE is an acronym for ego, aim, stories, and emotion. So if I said, wow, I can see you're upset. If I'm reflecting what we see on the outside, and by the way, we use the model from the outside in, And I want you to know that these 4 components are always present in any emotional interaction. So what we see on the outside is a person's emotion, which basically includes the tone of their voice, all their nonverbal behaviors, hands, gestures, facial expressions, and their feelings. So if I said I can see you're upset, what's going on? If you feel safe, you're going to tell me your story. Well, I'll tell you what's going on. You know, you were supposed to pick me up today at 6, and you didn't. You forgot me, and I had to call a taxi to get to work. But, you know, standing out on the curb, it started to drizzle before the taxi showed up. You know, I was soggy, and then I was late for a meeting. So what's in a story? Notice the recitation of events and a person's judgment. So the implied judgment was I messed up by not picking the person up because I forgot. And maybe even a dash of history. And I put history in because people bring their history to work. Then finally, what's really fascinating is a person's aim or intention. Every element in the story that's represented is representative of something that a person wanted and didn't get. So if I just took the quick hypothetical, what did I want? I wanted to be picked up on time. I probably didn't want to pay for a taxi because I mentioned it. I didn't want to be soggy because I mentioned that. And I missed a meeting, which means I wanted, right, to be on time for my meeting. So in the quick story that you told me, I got 4 different intentions that I wanted that weren't achieved. Now, what's interesting about what's next is what drives all this is ego. Now, ego gets a bad rap, but in reality, I'd like you to think of ego as personal values. It's things that are important to a person. So when a person sees that their values aren't esteemed or might even be violated by another person, they get emotional. So I like to say that emotion right here is the mask of meaning. We're very quick to decide what the emotion means. But if we don't get past the emotion, diffuse it, and get to the story, the aim, and the ego piece, then we miss the meaning, which means we can't deal with it. So I've identified 5 different ego needs or personal values, although there are 1,400 of them. Capability deals with expertise. So if I said to you at work, gosh, why did you do it that way? Notice what I just did. I challenged your capability or expertise. Acceptability deals with image. Respect deals with respect and dignity. Likability deals with value for the relationship. And security deals with safety. So you didn't recognize I was doing this, but we teach people to diffuse defensiveness from the outside in by using questions. And why do we do that? Because it gets a person out of their irrational part of their brain into the rational part where they can answer. And in the process of almost peeling the onion, we acknowledge the emotion, get to the story, identify what they wanted and didn't get, and figure out what part of that was most important to them. This is absolutely critical in conflict resolution. You have to get rid of the emotion, diffuse the emotion, the defensiveness in a hot or negative situation. Get to the story, the aim, and the ego to be able to resolve conflict. Then we've added another skill in this section to help resolve conflict. We just call it ACT to resolve conflict. So we use the EASE model to diffuse the defensiveness. But ACT is an acronym for acknowledge the conflict. I can see we don't agree. Would you at least willing to work on this to solve the problem? Notice that's really an attention check. And then what do you want goes to the aim, and why goes to the value. So if I can get you to tell me what you want and why, then I'll share what I want and why. And once we identified the whys, we've got to the values, and then together we can create a solution. How can we do both, or what do you think we ought to do? But resolution of any conflict is reached through rationality. So you use EASE to diffuse the defensiveness of it, and then ACT to resolve conflict. And then last but not least, I kind of put this out of order, but here's the reflection principle. All of us have a style. And unfortunately, our interaction style, which is what we call it, may offend other people when we don't intend to do so, because my style is not your style. And what we did is we basically took the verbs of initiate, discover, connect, and build that we use as a process for holding any difficult conversation. And we basically made them into nouns. Initiators are your type A personality who want it yesterday. Builders are kind of the folks that are big on ideas. They love appreciation and recognition, and they're really kind of fun. The connectors are the folks that are often very, very quiet, but they're excellent at execution and including everybody and getting everyone to cooperate. And discoverers are your analytical types, where they're asking tons of questions to analyze and demonstrate their expertise. So in the course, we help people to identify what their styles are and what the styles of others. And we do it by sharing quickly the mental, here's the mental part, action, the vocal, which is they're blunt, forceful, direct, and often cold. What do they do visually? They'll point or chop, they'll get in your space, those are visual. And results is the verbal. So we spend a good deal of time going through each particular style and helping people understand the mental, right, the vocal, the visual, and the verbal, I guess we'd call clusters of behaviors that identify what a person is. And then we just basically teach people to recognize and match or adapt to the style of another person in terms of proximity, eye contact, gestures, tempo, and tone by gently reflecting their behavior to them. So that's what we do in that section. Now let me just talk quickly about rollout strategy for maybe a minute, and then we'll turn it open to questions. So some companies choose to target a particular group or team that needs immediate help when they teach Real Talk. Others will take a top-down approach and focus on the C-suite and then all the managers. Others will roll it out after that to hourly employees who need to know how to talk to their managers or peers. The only challenge with doing the first one here, sometimes this is a lower level group of people, and then they start asking, well, my manager hasn't had this, will I get support? So there needs to be some real thought that goes into how you want to roll this out within an organization or a team. People choose to teach a 2-day class in-house, or they'll teach one day and then go away and return a short time later and teach a second class. But the modules are also written so you could just teach modules as you wanted and give specific assignments, and then have groups come back, you know, and catch up, and you give feedback and you do that. That's typically how it's done. And, you know, and we would invite people to kind of do that in terms of doing it in-house. We do have facilitators that we're happy to send your organization, but we would much rather certify your internal people who know your culture and know your challenges, who could easily adapt that training in-house and meet your needs more effectively than maybe an outside facilitator would. So my question would be is, you know, how can we serve you? Are you ready for certification? Do you want to talk about a proposal, or you have other questions about training content or process overview or comparison? You want us to make a comparison to other workshops? If you'd love to talk, we'd love to talk with you. And you can email us at info@dialogueworks.com to get in touch, set up some kind of a conversation. So that's the webinar for today. Brett, are you there? Do we have some questions that people have that they'd like to ask?
Nice job, John. I do have a few questions that have come in. Sam asked or said, you mentioned a statistic on what percentage of leaders prepare for difficult conversations. Can you review that again?
No, the only thing we did is we have a number of people in our database, and we sent out a SurveyMonkey survey, and we asked about 5 questions. And that was one of the questions. How many of you actually prepare to hold a difficult conversation? And I can't remember the exact statistic, but I was shocked when it was less than 5%. You know, they just kind of shoot from the hip, jump in. So if they've had no training, you know, they do the best they can, but 2 things could happen. One, they jump in and it doesn't go particularly well, which makes them skittish the next time around. Or they jump in and just, you know, don't do a very good job of it and end up really not getting the results that they want and disrespecting the individual, which challenges the relationship, if that makes sense. So I think it's absolutely critical that people learn to think about the conversation and the topic and the person, and basically think through, how am I going to start this? What's the facts? What's the interpretation I want to share? Right? And then what kind of questions do I want to ask? Then summarize and connection, and then get to the build. What are we going to change to make things different? So what we did is we've identified skills and a simple 4-step framework that's pretty easy to remember and basically kind of do that, if that makes sense.
I think so, John. Thanks. Cheryl asked wants to have you clarify a little bit more how she or someone in their organization can get certified to deploy this inside their own organization.
Well, there's a couple options. One, she could attend an open enrollment, which we're going to be doing one shortly, and then throughout the country. Or she could bring in a facilitator, and we'd come train the class on site, and then we spend a day afterwards reviewing content and helping them understand the nuances. The new version of Real Talk 2.0 is pretty slick. There are author videos in there. There's setup slides. I mean, most of the presentation is in the slide presentation. Leader's guide is simple, so we made it so that anybody could learn to certify this, whether it's an experienced facilitator, a novice, or even a leader who just wanted to grab the leader's guide and look at it and say, you know what, I want to train this to my people because of the message it sends that, you know, I'm committed to doing this. Does that help?
I think so. We'll let Cheryl interpret that. Todd mentioned that this would help performance management conversations. It might be worth just commenting, sharing your views on how this could help in that use.
Well, the model, this next book I'm writing, is about 8 conversations that every leader ought to know how to hold. And basically, one of the chapters will deal with how do you hold a performance conversation using initiate, discover, connect, and build. So that's the beauty of the model. You can adapt it in any conversation. The challenge with performance conversations is some people, many, wait till the very end of the year to hold the performance review, and that's where people find out that what they did didn't work. Whereas if a person was holding performance conversations throughout the year, then the performance review becomes just that, a review of the things that the person did that were corrected and they were coached to improve and they improved, rather than surprising people with that end conversation. So absolutely, the initiate, discover, connect, and build sequence or process can be used in any kind of a performance conversation, whether it's the one that you hold during the year or the one you hold at the end of the year.
Thanks, John. Walter asked, or said, my teams really need this. How can I get my boss on board to conduct a workshop like this?
I would say you have to tie it to results. I'd probably go back and look at your boss's objectives, and then your objectives, and then you have to make the case for doing the training from the context of improving something specifically that the boss deems to be important. So, for example, if the boss said, you know, we got to reduce inefficiency and redundancy, then I would tie that, look, there's this training out there that will help teach us to hold these conversations when we're not making very good decisions and when we're performing in such a way that we have to do rework and the like. I would couch it in that way. So I'd go back and say, what's the leader's objectives? And you've got to tie it to results of the team, to the division, to the organization as a whole, and demonstrate how that can improve different results while also creating respect and building relationships. That's what I'd do. Make the case that way, and it should sell itself.
Excellent. I think we have time for one last question. Julia said, I can see how this works between 2 people quite well. How would you apply this to a team where no one seems to be communicating well?
Probably what I'd do is I would start by, I probably would put the whole team through the training. And then what I do, and I've done this before, where people have undiscussables with one another, if they learn the process for doing it, then I would task them with going and talking to one another about what it is that they're not talking about, which is what we refer to as undiscussables. So if people have the skills, then they need to go and hold those conversations. And what basically happens when you put a team through, it kind of creates a culture of saying, look, here are some skills now that we want to apply as we work with each other, and it's expected that they will do just that so that we'll get different results, and then you do it. But you know, people have a reticence to step up because, like I said, they just kind of don't know what they want to do or how to do it, so they're afraid of the negative consequences, so they don't do it. And then what do they end up doing? Never giving person the feedback that they need to, so nothing changes. And then they talk to everybody else behind their back, which creates all kinds of ill feelings and lowers morale and negative emotional energy that just kind of saps everybody. So it's about getting people into the training, being committed to do it, and then doing it, and improving the way that the team is working together and how they collaborate.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone, for attending today's Real Talk 2.0 presentation. We hope this was useful to you. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit those via email to info@dialogueworks.com. You can also visit DialogueWORKS online at dialogueworks.com. And we look forward to talking to you in the future. Again, we welcome any questions. We hope this was a good use of your time. We've had some great organizations present today. Really great turnout, and we thank you for spending an hour with us today. Take care, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.